Hey guys, today we're going to cover creating seamless tiled textures using Photoshop and photo reference. Here you can see a couple of examples that I've made. I'm going to walk you through how I created a tiled texture for a plank and also a tiled texture for a wood floor, as well as using those diffuse maps to make a specular map. So you can see that the shine on the hardwood floor is really matching up well with the underlying texture. And this board is kind of more just uniformly highlighted. So we'll go over how to create all of that in just a second. All right, well, I'm just here on my desktop and I have two photos that I took just a little bit ago. One is of a board on my bed, and then the other one is a kind of a top-down photo of the hardwood of just one part of the floor in one of the rooms in the apartment. So using these photos, we're going to generate our textures. So the first thing to do is open up Photoshop and create a new document that is 1024 by 1024. That's kind of a good starting point. So I've got just in my clipboard here, or you can type in 1024 by 1024 and make sure it's a resolution of 72, and you can hit create and you'll get your texture. So the first thing I'll do is click my board image. That's the first texture I'll be working on, and I'll just drag it onto the stage. This is, pretty good. Just starting out, if you just hit enter, it will kind of lock it into place as its own layer. All right, zoom in a little bit so you can already see that the first thing I want to do is make sure that it's straightened out, because there's kind of a little bit of perspective introduced into the image by how I took my photo. I can, I guess, just cheat a little bit and just create a marquee selection of the most amount of board that I can fit in my marquee selection. And so that's just up here underneath of the move tool. And once I have a good swath of texture, I can just hit Control C to copy and then Control V to paste, and that will automatically make a new layer here. So I can hide my source image just so I don't end up editing that at all. And then slide my photo up to the top so it snaps. And the first thing I want to do is just kind of check how the highlights on the top and the bottom will line up. So if I just duplicate that layer by holding Option as and the Move tool, so if I select Move tool and I hold Option, you can see that my cursor switches to have a little bit of a different icon. There's a little white arrow underneath of the black arrow. That just indicates that when you click and drag, it's going to duplicate whatever layer is currently selected. So that's layer 1. So when I click and drag, I can then just snap it right to the old image. And you can see right away that the top of this board is much brighter than the bottom of the board. This has a lot of highlight. So a quick and easy way of removing that highlight is you can just kind of flip this new duplicated layer vertically. So if you hit Control T to activate Free Transform, and you right click on it and you say Flip Vertical, you can then slide it back on top of the other image and then just kind of erase the bottom. So you can activate your erase tool with E. Make sure that you have a soft edged brush, which is the hardness, and then a pretty large brush size will make it a little bit easier. I have it set to 10% flow so it doesn't just eliminate everything right away. But you can see as I start to erase, it creates kind of a more uniform look on the top and on the bottom. So now the top and the bottom of the board have a little bit more even lighting. The next step is to just try and match this edge and this edge so that when you tile it, you can kind of go on forever. So to do that, I'm just going to select both of these layers and then click and drag them over top of the new layer button, and that will duplicate them. And then I'll merge those two together by going Layer, Merge Layers. So now I have a duplicate of those two layers, but now it's just a single layer. And I want to duplicate it again so that I can create an offset. using the offset filter, which is located under Filter, Other, and then Offset. And I know my document is 512 or 1024 by 1024, so half of that is 512. So I don't want to flip it vertically, so I can type 0. Oops. So I'll just bring that up again under Other, Offset. So I don't want to flip it vertically, but I do want to flip it horizontally. So if I type 512 into there, you can see that it moved kind of both edges, and it put the middle right in the middle. So if because it's set to wrap around. So if I hit OK, and then I do the same erasing with my kind of soft-edged brush, I can erase this middle seam from my top image. So you can see over here in the layer, there's a little bit of an indication that there's really no pixels in the middle, and so you're just revealing the underlying layer. Cool. So this is pretty much all you have to do to set up the plank texture. So once you have it all organized and looking good, you can just say File, Save As, and I would recommend saving it in your source images folder. This automatically kind of brought up where I'm keeping my images. And so I'm inside of Kirby Room project folder and then source images. And I'll save this as wood plank source. Just to indicate to me that it's a PSD and it's kind of where I can still go to keep editing things easily and quickly. So if I save that, I have a PSD. But what I want to do is start to export out kind of individual files that have specific purposes. So the first one that I'll do is I'll say export, quick export, a ping. And then I'll name it wood plank _ DIF for diffuse. Or this is commonly what's kind of put in the color channel for materials. So wood plank diffuse. So when I export that, I can now jump over to Maya and start to show you how this texture can be implemented. So here we are in Maya, and I'm going to go ahead and do the next couple steps, which is to generate geometry for a plank, make UVs for that plank, create a material to go on the plank, and then link up the texture that we made in Photoshop into the color channel of the material so that we can start to see the final look of what we've made so far. Cool. So the jumping off point is to just make a cube, and so I'll hit the cube primitive button, and then I've measured the board in my room, and I know the basic dimensions. It's about 1 meter long, but then since I have an American tape measure, it's in English units, but I know that 5.5 inches tall is actually kind of close to 0.18 meters, and then it's 3/4 of an inch wide, which is 0.018 meters. So now we have a board that kind of approximately represents 1 meter of length, and then 5.5 inches tall and 3/4 of an inch wide. The next step is to generate some UVs. So for that, I'm going to switch over to the UV editing mode, and I'll use a new type of projection, or I guess I'll talk about a new type of projection, because previously we've been using planar. But for this one, because the geometry on the object itself really works well with an automatic projection, I'm just going to click that. So when I hit that, what it's doing is it's doing basically 3 planar projections all at once, and it decides what part of the object to project with based on how closely it's facing that camera. So the front and the back face used a planar projection that's the z-axis. The top and the bottom would use a planar projection along the y-axis. And then the sides would have used a planar projection from the x-axis. But because automatic, it does all 3 at the same time, it's just a little faster. And then it kind of nicely arranged them here, and it also scaled them so that all the UVs kind of have the same amount of texture information all on them, or text, yeah, I can't remember the right term. So what we'll do is, if you remember, our texture was close to the top up here, kind of up in this area. I'm going to rotate these so that they will fit in the right place. So rotate them 90 degrees that way. And then you can actually snap your UVs the same way you can snap your geometry in the scene. If you hold D and V and you click in the middle part of your move tool, you can, hold on, highlight your UVs, hold D and V, and then you can snap this gimbal right to the edge. And then you let go of D and V, and all you hold is X, and it will snap to the different grid parts of your UV editor. So you can pop it just right to the corner, which is nice and convenient. Okay, so then I'm just going to shift the other UVs in place so that they will be in the right location for the texture. Slide them up a little bit, and then I'll also slide my ends up here. You can see that maybe the ends aren't quite all the way where they need to be. So you can switch over to using just individual UVs by clicking this button up here, and then drag select over the ends of all the UVs, and holding X, you can actually snap those right to the edge of what your UV is. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that over here just to make sure that they're actually there. Yeah, looks like they are. Great. So the next step is to apply a new material, and I want to use a blinn because it's got some specularity to it, and it's a little easier to control and also plug in other maps if we ever want to do that. So I'll switch back to Maya Classic, and then right click on my model and say New Material and Blinn. I've got a bunch of edits to it, and so I want to clear out the history just so it's a little easier to find my material over here in the attribute editor. So the button for that is either this little clock looking thing with an X, or you can say Edit, Delete by Type, History. And when you do that, it clears out all the saved edits that you'd made, and now I can easily find my blinn. I'm going to rename this to Plank Matte, so it's easy to find in the future. All right, so then in my color channel, I'm going to go ahead and link in the diffuse texture that I made in Photoshop. My file, or my project, has already been set to my project folder, so when I open up here, it should just appear right over here in my source images, which it does. Hooray. All right, so here we have the texture, and we can see how it's looking. Looks pretty good. The plank itself maybe is a little bit low poly. I don't think in real life boards ever have this sharp of an edge. So I'll go ahead and add in just a little bit more geometry so that it softens it up. And to do that, I will highlight all the edges and just apply a bevel to everything. Under the modeling toolkit, you can click your bevel tool, and then in your options menu you can dial in the final look of stuff. So I'll try 0.2. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I'll actually add in 2 more segments, so that'll add in 2 more edges, which will soften the edge even more. So when I hit 3, you can see that now it has kind of a little bit of a more rounded look, which is probably what would happen as it came out of the factory. They would have sanded the edges so that people aren't getting sliced and diced by their bed boards. Great. So one last thing to illustrate is just about how the texture and the scale of the model are interacting, or the UVs and the scale of the model are interacting. So for that, I'm going to switch back over to UV editing. And when I'm building, I often will leave my source board that I like, and I think that everything matched up well. I'll leave it off to the side, and I'll just duplicate it to create new boards to build with. So here, maybe I needed a longer board for the whole side of the bed. So for that, if I were to scale this out, you can see that the texture is also stretching. And that's because the UVs aren't actually getting any bigger. So as you scale it, it stretches the texture out. But you can fix that just by selecting the UVs and then scaling them as well. So as you scale them out, the information tightens up. And because of how we designed our texture where it's tileable horizontally, the board, you don't ever notice that it's actually using the same texture over and over. So it's a pretty good workflow here. All right, so the next step is to work on the floor, and that'll be a couple more steps because it's got some artifacts in the source image. So to get going on our floor texture, I'm going to go ahead and shrink Maya, or minimize Maya. Come back over to Photoshop and make a new document. That will be 1024 by 1024, again, with a 72 resolution. Hit create. And for this one, I'm going to drag in the source image that I took of my floorboards. So here, I'm going to make them vertical, just because that's how I want to do it. And then kind of put it up at the top, and then scale it uniformly so that it fills both the sides and the bottom. Then hit enter to lock it in. All right, so you can see that I've got some tilting and some perspective and other things. So that's the first thing that I'm going to address. So if I activate my move tool, I'm going to start by getting this edge all matched up right with the corner there. So I'll just hit the arrow keys, which you can use to just nudge an image. So I'm tapping on the left arrow key until that gets right in the corner. Then I'm going to use a free transform that is skewing. And so what skewing can do is basically you're able to grab each of these handles on the corners individually and pull them without affecting the other ones. So if I pull this bottom corner over, I can get the bottom of the edge of the board lined up here. So that's looking a little bit better. Then I'm going to try and get this edge lined up in this corner. So I'll pull that over a little bit. And then I want to get the bottom of the board lined up too. So I'll scoot this one in. And that's pretty good. So it looks like I might need to do one more adjustment using the warp tool, because you can see how the edge of this board around this area is kind of in a little bit. So if I right click on the transform again and I activate warp, I can pull the middle out just a little bit so that it lines up nicely. All right, so I hit enter. I've got pretty straight boards off of the sides, but I think the first thing you'll notice is that my image has a real bright spot down here in the corner. And this is going to be a real problem for creating a kind of very convincing tiling look, because what will happen is that you'll notice this kind of hot spot everywhere, even if we get the seams all measured out and you know, erase everything. It's still going to have kind of this high hot zone and kind of this darker area. So we're going to do the exact same process that we did with the hand texture, where we create a black and white base which has kind of very neutral shadows, and then create a couple color layers over top of it to kind of inject back in some of this kind of warm wood tones. So the first thing I'll do is hit Control A to highlight the entire canvas, hit Control C and Control V. And so that pastes a new version, and I'm not going to edit my source. That's just generally a good good workflow. You don't really want to start to change the pixels of your source image in case you ever need to go back and get new information. So now that I have my new layer, I'm going to duplicate it again and remove all the color. So if I hit Control U, that will bring up the hue saturation menu, And to take out all the color, you just dial the saturation all the way to the left, -100. Now it's a black and white image. Then you can still see, even without any color, this is much brighter in this area than the other areas. So there's a pretty cool filter which will kind of normalize across the entire thing and create a more even look, which is called high pass. And so when you have high pass active, you can dial up and down here, so that's like completely making it gray, and then kind of not doing a whole lot on the other end. I'm going to put it at about 15. And so now we have a very kind of good base to start to generate our shadow information from. So now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it again and create the kind of vertical tiling. So right now it can tile easily horizontally just because the edges of the boards line up nicely, so I don't have to do a whole lot there. But I do need to make sure that the tops and the bottoms line up. So, but to do that, I'm going to use the offset filter, which is located under filter, offset. And then instead of horizontal, I'm going to flip it vertically by 512, because that's half of what my document size is. So now that I have this duplicated layer that's been offset, I come in with my erase tool and the soft edge, and I just start to remove this middle seam slowly so that I can kind of make it a little bit more convincing. All right, so I'm getting there. It's looking good. Kind of clear this area out. Let that board show through a little more. All right, so we've got our vertical tiling going now. The next step is to add our color washes. So for that, I'm going to create a new color layer on top of the gray. So if you hit the little circle and then say solid color, and it should bring up this menu. I'll just start with the default, which is black, but I want to sample one of the colors here from my original layer. So if I double click the color layer and I have my original layer on top, it automatically brings up the little ink dropper tool, and then I can sample one of the colors. I'm going to try one of these. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good starting point. So if I hit OK, and I hide my top layer, and I switch my color layer to overlay, now I'm starting to get some of the wood tones back in here. But this is very kind of even. It's not super convincing, so I want to add in a little noise or a little color noise on top of my base color layer. So for that, I can just click my first color fill and duplicate it, and I'll go ahead and rename the base color to base color. And then the top one, I'm going to say maybe accent or noise 1, noise color 1. How about that? And switch this to a new hue. So for that, I'm going to activate my original layer again, double click my new layer, and sample one of these other colors. Yeah, I like that darker brown. And then hide my top layer again. So by default, it's showing everything again. And one trick you can do to see what your mask layer is looking like is to hold Alt and click on the mask. And so what that does is actually show you what your mask looks like. And I'm going to use a paint bucket tool and just fill it in with black so that it hides everything. So if I go back to my layer, you can see that this layer is no longer adding any color information. So the next step is to kind of generate some randomness or noise into the mask so that it's kind of got some random distribution of color in the boards. So to do that, I'm going to say filter, render, and then clouds. So these are black and white clouds. And you can keep doing the same filter operation by hitting Control, Alt, and F. by default. So I will keep doing that until I find a set of clouds that I kind of like. So I've got Control Alt and I'm tapping F. Oop, I've got to be on Photoshop. So if I hit Control Alt and F, it kind of keeps cycling through. Yeah, I like that one. Okay. So now that that is my mask layer, if I click back on my my color layer, you can see that it's allowing the darker brown through and showing more of the color. So at this point, you can dial up and down your opacity on that layer until you're just getting kind of hints of tone. So what that does is it really breaks up. So this is very uniform. When you add in just a little bit of noise, it starts to be a lot more believable. Like the wood is more kind of natural. So now I'll make one final accent color layer using the exact same process. So I'll duplicate my my base color, slide it up above everything, and change this to more of a reddish brown. So I'll just by hand dial that in this time instead of sampling from anything. So now that that's nice and red, I'll alt click on my mask and I'll fill that in so that it's totally hiding everything. And this time we're going to try and create more of a vertical look to our noise so that it can kind of match up with a couple of the planks. So to get going, I'm going to do another render clouds. I'm less concerned about kind of the overall look of the clouds this time, so I'll just accept the first one, and then I will bring up the shadows and bring down the highlights by hitting Control L to bring up levels, and then dial up the darkest darks and down the brightest brights. Then I'm going to run a texturizer on this by hitting Filter, going to the Filter Gallery, and then under Texture there's Texturizer, which is this type of filter. And you have a couple different options: brick, burlap, canvas, and sandstone. We're going to use brick because you get a nice kind of horizontal pattern that we're going to rotate so that it's vertical. The scaling is at 200% and the relief is 4. So when you hit OK, you should end up with something like this. But we want our bricks to line up with our boards, so we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. So we can just hit Control T to activate Free Transform, rotate it, and then hit Enter to lock it in. And then we want to scale these bricks so that they're the same amount of vertical lines as there are boards. So I'll turn on my reference one more time so that we can count the number of boards and then try and make sure that's how many base or how many bricks we have going on here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 34, 16, 17, 19 boards across. So if I hide my top layer, activate my mask by Control or Alt clicking on the mask, I'll then be scaling it out to the side. The important thing about the new version of Photoshop is that by default, if you grab the side handle and you start to scale, it does it uniformly. So it scales in proportion. It scales proportionally, I should say. But we don't necessarily need it to scale proportionally. We can just go to the side. So if you hold Shift, when you click on just this horizontal or the side handle, it'll only scale it in that direction. So we'll keep going, and then maybe I'll give this a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Definitely not. Keep going. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Still a little more. Let's scale it this way this time. Oh, holding Shift. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Oh, man. I think that's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Boom. All right. So now that that mask is lining up with our boards, if we click back on the main thing, you can see that this highlight is kind of all along the edge of stuff. So it's a pretty good look, especially when you start to dial it down so it's just kind of more of an accent versus being so red. So now we have these kind of red tones running down the edges of our boards, and it's looking pretty good at this point. So the final step is to make sure that this entire texture is being able to tile vertically. So to do that, I'm going to not merge everything, but I will create a new layer that contains all the information that we've done so far. If I hit Control A and then hit Control Shift and C, that will copy all the pixels. So that instead of just copying the layer that I'm currently on by hitting Control C, I'm hitting Control Shift C, and that copies all visible pixels on the canvas. So when I do that, and then I hit Control Shift V, it will place it in place at the very top. So this layer now has all the color information and all the shadow information that we've been working on so far. Actually, I think this might be a little bit red still, so I'll dial this to maybe 62 instead of 72. All right, then I'll do the same operation, Control A for everything, Control Shift C, and Control Shift V, and that creates this new layer. Great. So then if you remember, we needed to duplicate this one more time and then offset it vertically. So using other offset, it remembers my last operation, so vertically offset, and we're looking pretty good. Maybe just erase a little bit in the middle just in case. Yeah. Great. So now we have a horizontally and vertically tiled wood texture. So I'm going to save this Photoshop document in my source images folder and call it wood floor source. Save. And then switch back over to Maya for the final step. So switching back over to Maya, I'll just click here and then create a plane to put my new tiled wood plank or tiled wood hardwood floor texture on it. So I can click on the plane primitive tool here, creates the default one, which I'm going to switch back over to Maya Classic here for a second. So inside of my channel box, I'll click on the polyplane and switch these back both to 1. So instead of 10 divisions, I just want 1. Don't need a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Then I can right click, make a new material, make it a blinn, because this will also be shiny, or it'll have some shine to it, it'll have some specularity. Rename my plane to floor matte, and then click on the color channel and link in the file that we saved out of Maya. I actually went ahead and saved a wood floor diffuse instead of using the source one. I'm just going to use a ping. So when I click that, I have my little, my super shiny wood tiled texture here. And if I wanted to, I could scale this up. So say our room is 4 meters by 4 meters, right? So it's big. So once again, we have our texture is getting stretched. But just like in the past, we can scale everything. Oh man, get rid of these windows. Go back to UV editing. You can scale your UVs so that you have it then tiling. So this one is actually going to tile vertically and horizontally because of how we set it up. So when we scale, 1, 2, so scaled it up. Now it's repeating, and it's pretty convincing. You can see though, let me turn down the specularity for now, just so it's a little easier to see. So you can see, even with all the work that we did, you can see patterns emerge the more that you scale stuff. In our scenes, we won't necessarily worry too much about that because the camera will be in a certain position, There'll be lighting, which will create a different shadow across the entire thing. So it should hide it pretty well. And I'll hide the grid too, just so that's not getting in the way. But yeah, I'll maybe scale this up just a little bit more so that we can get it tiling just a little more, so it's a little tighter. Scale it up. Cool. So now I'm pretty happy with how the planks are. But like this board, this floor is uniformly specular. So you can see when I go like that, that's a pretty shiny floor. It's also kind of unconvincing. It's almost like a layer of goop got poured on it and it all dried super flat, like maybe like a bar top or something like that. That's not really how hardwood floors are usually if they're real. It'll take into account the wood grain. So we'll make one last map and then plug it into the specular color to get our shine kind of more closely matching our diffuse texture. So for this last map, it should just be a couple steps. We'll switch back over to Photoshop. We will do our same copying all the pixel information by highlighting everything and by hitting Control A, hit Control Shift C, and then Control Shift V. And then instead of having a color map, we only need a black and white one. So if you bring up your hue saturation by hitting Control U, you can drop the saturation to 0. And then I want to kind of exaggerate the black and white contrast. So this time I'm going to make a levels adjustment layer, hold Alt and click to link it to the one right below it. And then in here, instead of dialing these bottom ones, I'm going to dial these top ones. And see how by crunching it, it's actually exaggerating the whites and the blacks. So it's kind of increasing the contrast. Hit OK. This map now is going to be our specular map. And how the specular map works is it's basically saying whatever is white is shiny and whatever is black is not shiny. So you can get some variation in the amount of shine that you have on your object. So here, I'll just do a quick export by saying File, Quick Export as ping, and then say hardwood floor underscore spec, or whatever acronym you want to put on the end. All right, so I'll jump back over to Maya, then click on my object. In the attribute editor, find the specular color channel. It's under specular shading. Hit the little options box and link our new file in here. So I called it wood floor spec. So if I click that, now if you highlight, you can see that it's actually much more believable. This is way closer to how hardwood floors, if they're natural hardwood floors, are supposed to interact with light. Well, cool. This has been a pretty in-depth set of instructions. So if you guys have any questions, please bring them to class and I will answer them as best I can. Also, I'm available through email, so just shoot me a message if you want something before Tuesday.